Hi, everybody. It's David Leese here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. It's April 10, 2025, the year of our Lord, and it's halftime, halfway to this federal election on April the 28th. So, what are you thinking? Um, it's a very interesting time as there's so many moving parts in play as we think about policy choices, because to govern is to choose. I don't know about you, but I'm having a lot of very interesting conversations with friends and family and strangers over hill and dale across this country. And I hope you are too. That's part of the democratic process that we cherish in this country. And so we are very grateful that you could join us coast to coast to coast as we talk about policy choices. And on April the 10th here, there is a lot of moving parts here, and we're going to talk a little bit about those things, both domestically and internationally, because they all impact the future of this incredible country. And I have two great guests that are going to join us in a moment. So I'm really grateful for them. So don't be shy. Make sure that you table your questions as usual. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Prairie. It's always exciting to see people make their comments and questions, and I really do appreciate it. It's really quite remarkable. Our producer, Lorraine, and I have lots of chats about the conversations that we get from our audience, and we're so impressed by the participation of people. And we even have a hello from Robert Falcon-Ouellette, who's actually going to join us on the other side shortly. So isn't that cool? So it's a neck and neck race in many respects between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and we're going to get into that. And the NDP's there as well. And it's interesting. One of the things that I'm fascinated about is I get questions from different people about the Frontier Center, and I try to explain to them that we're really about trying to serve the Canadian people with better ideas, better policy choices that serve Canadians. And we are passionate about policies that guide us. And that's the lens, the glasses, if you will, that we look through. As we look at the myriad, I call it white noise out there. There's all kinds of stuff out there, in my humble opinion, that really isn't good public policy, but is masquerading as public policy. And there's always healthy debate about what that is. And I want to give you an example of some of those principles, one of which would be, well, transparency. Is it clear what is going on in terms of both the goals of that policy and the impacts? And does it really benefit Canadians? Or is it kind of a head fake? So this is where we need to use our critical thinking skills, our thinking caps, as perhaps our kindergarten teacher might say. And we need to think about transparency and evidence. That is, we're data driven. We're not just based on opinion, but we're really trying to earnestly look at the facts. And we're also asking, from a principle point of view, does the policy that's being proposed, does it empower you as a Canadian to have more control over your life? Does it get closer to your life and how you can make wise decisions? After all, you're the only one who knows about your life. It's not some quote distant expert. So anyways, there's a lot of other principles, but I thought I'd just mention that because from time to time I get questions around how do you really look at these issues. So we look at it through that lens of principles, not partisanship at all. So, by the way, there's a comment here from Dennis who says there is enough dirt on Mark's Carney. I think that's not a Freudian slip. That's intentional. And this Liberal government to bring down 1,000 Conservative governments, but apparently not enough to bring down one Liberal government. So interesting. The mainstream media propaganda. So that's one perspective that's in play here. What is really going on? Why is it that the Liberals seem to be in lead right now? So that's part of our discussion today. I also want to put in front of you a point, and that is it's not only during an election, it's not only important what the parties are talking about, what the media is talking about, and your neighbors are talking about, but also what they're not talking about. And one of the things that we don't talk about enough is, of course, the financial state of our nation as we rack up record deficits, both at the federal, provincial, and other levels of government, and the significant debt that's happening. In fact, it's very interesting this week. I don't know if you noticed, but credit agencies lowered the great province of BC's credit rating. The credit rating is significant because they rate the debt that is floated in the bond market, right? You can buy a bond from a country and they give you a certain interest rate. And the credit agencies are supposed to do their due diligence, their deep dive in the health and the credit worthiness of that bond. And so it's interesting. This last week, we heard that credit rating agencies Standard and Poor's and Moody's have both downgraded BC's rating, citing the province's ballooning deficit and the apparent lack of a plan to dig the province out of its fiscal hole. So the point is, when you get downgraded, you pay more interest. So that doesn't go into programs like building hospitals or giving that back to you as a taxpayer. No, that goes into more interest because they see you as a higher credit risk. So that's kind of amazing because BC's got a lot of fiscal capacity, but the debt is getting so high. I think we're looking at, I believe it's predicted that this year's deficit would soar to 14.3 billion. And yeah, there ain't no plan. So is that going to happen with Canada as well? That's a question maybe for another time, but these are things that are all very relevant. So there's a lot going on in the headlines. If you like this conversation, please like it. You can do that on your screen. That's a nice way to kind of bump up the so-called algorithm of our audience and share it with your friends if these issues are important to you during this election time. So I am delighted to welcome our two guests today. I'm going to welcome Robert Falcon-Ouellette. He's a former Liberal MP. He's a great guy, and he also is a professor at the University of Ottawa, and he has lots of intelligent things to say. So a warm welcome to you, Robert.
Hey, I'd never thought someone would say I'm a nice guy. I thought that my mother would just think that.
No, I do know you, and you are a pleasure to engage with and listen. So a warm welcome again, Robert, from coast to coast to coast. I know that last time that was one of the things that you mentioned is let's don't forget that other coast. It's really quite a profound statement when you think of it, given the size of
very, very important. Canadian sovereignty.
Absolutely. Okay, so my second friend is Dr. Marco Noverogini, and Marco is the Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier, and he has incredible background both in teaching and research. And a warm welcome to you, Marco.
Bonjour tout le monde, j'espère que vous allez bien.
Excellent. And, I know that where you grew up originally was the incredible country of Nicaragua. So I guess we should intersperse a lot of our conversation in Spanish as well. So it's great to see you, Marco, my friend. And I know that you're a little bit under the weather, so I really do appreciate it.
We've got all the languages here today, David. You got French, a little bit of Cree, it's English, obviously. So it's very Canadian.
Excellent.
Indeed. Yeah, good to be here.
Okay. I won't bore you with Latin because I don't know of any current Latin speakers today. It's all more foundational to the Romance language, but that's an aside. Gosh, there's a lot going on today. It almost has our heads spinning, and we're curious about the audience's sense of what are the issues that matter to you. And of course, I'm going to start off with a little bit about voter intentions here. I'm going to bring up that current poll here, and I know this is a little bit in action. I'm going to mention also a Nanos poll. This is from Abacus just a few days ago, so it's 39-39 with the Conservatives and 11% with the NDP, the Bloc at 6%, 3% the Greens, People's at 2%, and other, I'm not quite sure. I guess they're not registering. And I think a Nanos poll shows there's a couple more points with the Liberals over the Conservatives, and with the NDP, I believe at 8.5%. So any response to that, Robert? Does that surprise you?
Well, I continue to be surprised about the NDP. Some polls have them down as low as 8, hitting the 7% range. That's not been seen since 1993, and in 1993 they almost disappeared off the face of the political map in Canada. Weren't even considered an official political party within the House of Commons. I think Jagmeet's got a lot of things that he needs to do in the next little bit. He needs to really start talking about the issues that motivate his base of supporters to come out and not vote for the Liberals, but to actually vote for the NDP. And I think that progressive vote has fled the NDP to go to the Liberals, and it's not that the Conservatives have lost so much support. It's just that there seems to be this stampede from the NDP. Because I think people are actually quite afraid, and perhaps Mark Carney is that soothing voice, that banking voice, almost puts you to sleep some days when you listen to him. He's getting better, but it seems to be very calming, and the white hair, it seems to know what he's doing, and I think maybe that in times of trouble, that's what people need, or that's what they want, or feel they need in their fear.
That's interesting, Robert. So would you buy into that thesis, that analysis, Robert, that outlined that there's kind of a transfer of support from the NDP to the Liberals, Marco?
I think Robert is right in a few ways. This election certainly means the future and survival, if survival at all, of Jagmeet Singh. This will be his third election. He has done rather poorly in the previous two in relation to the previous NDP leader. And one has to point out that the previous NDP leader was pushed out for a performance that was far better than Jagmeet Singh in the last two. So that puts him in a very, very hot seat. Not to mention the fact that he hasn't been able to raise very, very much money. The party is in trouble financially as well. But Robert is also right that the NDP support has bled to the right and to the left. The NDP really isn't a Labour Party in the conventional sense anymore. It is a party of a certain type of intellectual elite, very hard left, and people who identify with issues that are not really all that mainstream, like issues of sexual identity and so forth, that are, in spite of the mainstream media, they are not really mainstream issues. They're really fringe issues, and the labor part of the labor vote in Canada, the workers, have bled significantly to the right, towards the Conservative Party. You hear that in tones that, for example, Pierre Poilievre uses when he says he talks about boots and not suits. That is essentially playing to that crowd that is coming toward him. So both parties are essentially, the Conservatives and the Liberals are vying for what seems to be increasingly hollowing of the NDP, and they may end up, as Robert pointed out, very much in the place that they were in the 90s. What also indicates that there is a serious vying for the NDP vote is that since the beginning of the campaign, when Mark Carney started, more or less, I would say, on the right side of the spectrum, I'm going to be charitable and say borrowing a great deal of policies from the Conservatives, he's now swung dramatically to the left. Essentially, his adherence to the idea that we should have more pipelines is now conditional on just about anybody's veto for a pipeline. He's talking now about buying guns back. That's kind of a very lefty policy, and he's now embraced DEI, LGBTQ, and all that stuff. And just recently, he's essentially thrown a bone, I would say, to the radicals on the Hamas-Israel issue by essentially nodding and agreeing that Israel is a genocidal state.
Yeah, I think the beginning of the campaign was quite interesting. Mark had moved the party quite much more to the center, even into the right. And I think you're right, Marco, that he's been attempting perhaps to protect that left flank in some way, because at some point, like I was surprised even Jagmeet Singh, he wasn't really capitalizing on that, because I think, removing the carbon tax that the Liberals had fought for 9.5 years, talking about the ways to improve the environment, and that under Trudeau seemed to all be abandoned, and then all of a sudden Jagmeet wasn't really talking about that either. And I think that space was open, and now I think the Liberals are kind of nervously watching to see because Jagmeet has started talking about Indigenous issues. He started talking more about the environment. He was trying to talk about the workers, but I don't think it was I'm not sure he was really speaking to that base that need to be mobilized and come out to vote for him. And so, Mark is really trying to protect that side flank.
Yeah, it does beg the question, what exactly remains as the NDP base? Does it not?
Yeah, well, the base
think,
could be even lower. Like, you never know, like how low can they go? In 1993, they were at 6%. That's 1 or 2 seats. Out here in Winnipeg, I was checking out Winnipeg Center. There's a young candidate, Rahul Walia. He's 23 years old. They are fully funded, and they're nipping at the heels. And the NDP MP, Leah Gazan, is out knocking on the doors. I don't think she's usually. They need to knock on the doors in Winnipeg Center. It's a very, very safe seat. I see kind of signs for both of them. It's quite equal, but it's people are kind of looking at that. And I think, and I was talking to Rahul a little bit, and he said that on the doorstep, he's getting a really great reaction from people. They're nervous about Donald Trump. They want someone who they think has a lot of experience to look after the economy, to guide the Canadian nation states and Canada, and they think Mark Carney is the person for it, and they're not sure Jagmeet is the person to offer that guidance, and they really want to make sure that vision is pushed forward, and so they're abandoning, it seems, the NDP. They might hold their nose and vote for the banker, which might not be a normal alliance between some of the left elite, the intelligentsia of class of Canada.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all.
So it's a great conversation as we see these dynamics swirl around the NDP. And it seems like the overarching themes are what you just mentioned. Is the election about Donald Trump and Orange Man bad, or is it about rebuilding Canada after 10 years? Is that issue changing now? It seems like just as the campaign began, it was all about concerns about Donald Trump, and now that seems to be receding a little bit. But what is your take on where those issues, that key issue is ending up here, Marco?
Well, I think Donald Trump has been the big noise of the campaign. You alluded to the noise in your introduction, and I think it continues to be noise and quite noisy at that. But it is kind of receding in the background as people sort of begin to ask and demand for issues, and the parties begin to jockey for positions and trying to figure out where the soft vote is and attract them. Again, the hollowing of the NDP really is motivating this jockeying of ideas, because the original plan seemed to be, and there is never just a single plan in an election, much like in a football game or a hockey game. You have to have several different plans and adapt as you go. But the original Liberal plan seemed to have been essentially to position themselves right behind or next to the Conservatives, and really try to vacuum a lot of those votes that were anti-tax. Because let's remember that this election was originally billed as the anti-carbon tax election, right? So the Liberals rightly began.
Yeah,
there.
also a cost of living, because that's often related to the cost of living. I know
Indeed.
I've seen it at the pumps. The price of the pumps went down. In Manitoba, we had Wab Kinew, the NDP, who gave us a tax break, 14 cents on the liter after he was elected in 2023 for about 1 year. And then it ended in January. And so it shot up 15 cents the next day. And now it's back down to about 122. So I think people are a little excited. But when for me, one of the main issues was always the cost of living. When you're at the supermarket, the no frills or the low laws, and you see the seniors literally counting their They don't count pennies anymore, but you see them at kind of standing around the meat section, looking for the sales, the 30% off, deciding what they can take, how many eggs they can take, how much they can actually afford. It's that's, I think, the most important thing. And because at the end of the day, if people can't live off a pension, that they've worked maybe 30, 40 years to have, we're not going to be having a very good society. And if they can't afford the rent, and there are seniors that do become homeless because they just simply can't afford anything that's in the markets. And I think for me, when I speak to I do have friends that are seniors, very fixed income, $1,000 a month. It's tight. And they
Indeed.
really are counting everything. They go to they call up the Winnipeg Harvest, which is the food bank, to ask for some help at the end of the month, and even have to go down and volunteer their time. And I think for me, it's a little bit hard. I don't think. It's hard for, I think, any politician. Mark Carney, especially, he's been at a certain level his whole life, and even Pierre Poilievre, or even Jagmeet Singh, who loves to wear a Rolex. All of them, they are so used to a certain lifestyle that it becomes very difficult for them to understand the average concerns of just ordinary people with families and children they need to pay for, and the shoes, and the school calling you up asking you, can you give us $10 for this or for that, or the lunch or the outing or something. It all gets very expensive.
I think that's well said. So the other dynamic is, of course, the kind of seemingly disconnect between the polls and attendance at different rallies. I mean, here's a clip from a astounding rally. I think it was in Edmonton. It looked like some 10 or 15,000. I get different reports on the numbers. But skepticism about the polls and who's doing the polls. I pride myself in being a student of statistics, and I look at some of these polls, and I think some of them are frankly a waste of time, and others are more incisive. But I'm having a hard time totally understanding, are the polls actually possible today, where so many people don't even have landlines? It's hard to get a hold of people, and there's a whole dynamic where people are a bit shy. Any comment on that, Marco?
Yeah, I think the better pollsters have figured out ways to correct for the absence of landlines, and correct for ages and regions, and all that stuff. But there seems to be something else at play, considering that it's not just what the polls are reporting, but that there is now a debate about whether the polls actually mean something or anything at all, and whether the polls are right or wrong. And the reality is, in the last sort of decade and a half, we have a significant number of elections in which polls have been either somewhat wrong, or in many cases absolutely dead wrong. And so there seems to be now a kind of a move to sort of say, well, the polls are right because it favors whoever they favor, and that's one thing. And another move to sort of delegitimize the fact that there are these giant rallies taking place, and somehow they don't mean anything. But the reality is, polls are polls. They mean something, and they will mean different things to different people. But the poll that really means something is the actual one on election day. And so, we should remain calm and figure it out, or try to figure it out, including polls, how things are going. But they're definitely not the last word on everything.
What do you think, Robert?
Well, that maybe that rally, but was that all AI generated by ChatGPT? Is that? I remember in the election in the United States, there was those theories that some of the crowds were AI generated images.
It's all CGI.
CGI, and they were looking at the reflection in mirrors and phones, and this person looked a little off. But it's true that people don't have landlines. A lot of young people won't respond to cell phones. I get a call, and if I don't know the number, I'm not responding. Though when I do, sometimes it's who I want to talk to, and sometimes it's someone trying to sell me something, or trying to get me to click on a button so they can have an import duty paid for. So I think people are quite wary about getting unsolicited phone calls, but I believe some pollsters are trying to do just simple questions, quick text messaging. Do you support us? Do you not? Do you support this party or this party? But who knows? We are entering a brand new age, a lot of distrust as well in government. But the polls, sometimes they give you a sense of what's happening. We know from the polls that, just the arrival of Mark Carney changed the whole dynamic. And, when I was speaking with people who were in the Liberal Party, current MPs, they were rather excited that they kind of were hopeful that he would change what was going on. And then it seems to have borne some fruit. Because they could kind of have this new face, this new leadership, and then push some things to the side. The issue is sometimes I know people think that the role of an MP is extremely important, but sometimes if the leader takes a certain position and really wants something, or that's the direction they want to go in, that's the party the direction goes in, and it doesn't matter what the MPs want. It's very leader oriented in our political parties today. And I know people have criticized saying it's the same Liberal team, but it's almost like hiring a lawyer who will advocate for your position and argue it in court, whether you're guilty or not guilty. It doesn't really matter. It's up to they're looking after the leader, and hopefully the leader has the right values in place, which is rather unfortunate in our political system today. That's
it really
just
is.
Come to.
And it is interesting. I know that in the research in federal elections, usually the local candidate makes maybe about 10%, 15% difference in terms of the vote. But increasingly, the emphasis is what you say, Robert. The emphasis is on the leader, not necessarily the local candidate as well. It's a very interesting dynamic, isn't it, Marco?
And it is somewhat ironic that one of the main themes of the campaign so far, given all the noise about the orange guy, has been patriotism. But there is a different angle here, because the reality is that all this emphasis on the leader is essentially is presidentializing our politics. The reality is we do not elect prime ministers in this country, or provincial premiers for that matter. The executive is determined in a different way, and that is by support of the faction that has the greatest numbers of seats. And so implied in that rule is that people will vote for the local representative, and then the local representative kind of indirectly becomes a kind of an effect on who the leader will be. But in our day, and this is going back perhaps the last 50 years, so it's not something that just happened today, but it's become even more acute. Mark Carney, as Robert pointed out, arrived on the scene. Prime Minister Trudeau has completely receded from the horizon, and there is no other political leader inside the Liberal Party, for example, that is featured in any way. Is all Carney all the time, and that is, I think, a kind of a misfortune, because that
it was Trudeau before. It was Trudeau all the time, and it was very hard to have space.
That's not exactly how the Westminster system is supposed to work.
Exactly. No, that's a very good point about the system. We've got a lot of questions from the audience. I'm talking, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm talking with Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini, who's Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier, as well as Robert Falcon-Ouellette. And he is a former Liberal MP, and he's also professor at the University of Ottawa. So thank you very much for all your questions and comments. It's interesting. We have, for example, there's so many comments here. Prairie says, I don't believe the polls either. Most younger people won't answer a number they don't know, and the older ones answer every time the phone rings. So how's that? It's interesting. So what do you think about the polls? We'd love to hear your comments. And I know that rallies do matter. I think one of the things I've learned in the political realm is that if you have people who take the time to come out physically to a rally, that says something in terms of their commitment to whomever they're supporting, and that can make a difference. Again, it goes back to dynamics. There's another comment here. Trump isn't the main problem. He has pointed out serious issues with our borders, cartel activity, foreign influence, etc., etc. These are legitimate concerns. So, yeah, that's part of the interesting dynamic, isn't it? That these challenges have really well, do you think it's really put the spotlight on the need for this country to kind of get its policy act together? Like, for example, free trade in this country, depending on how you calculate it, that could represent easily 3 or 4% extra in terms of percentage points on our gross domestic product, our GDP. So is that's probably one of the benefits of this kind of challenging discussion, is it not, Robert?
Well, the free trade idea is, in fact, actually, I was on the finance committee when we started approving more free trade agreements and reviewing free trade agreements with many different countries around the world. And so we started really in 2015. A lot of this work had previously been done by the Conservative government, and this seems to be about a 40-year effort for multiple Canadian governments in succession. And we are the only country in the G7 that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country, including the United States, even if it's suffering a bit. And the reason for that was to not put all our eggs in one basket, to actually try and have a diverse, trading partners and to be able to be that conduit where if someone wants to sell something in the United States but wants to have it assembled, perhaps in an environment which is perhaps more conducive, or just maybe testing out the market. If you're a European, often you want to do things in Quebec before you go down to the US. It just gives different countries that opportunity before going down into the US to do something and to try out a smaller market before they hit the big American market. And so it was supposed to be quite helpful to the Canadian economy. Maybe we should have done that 20, 30 years ago and diversified the economy. But because it's not just about natural resources, it's supposed to be really about everything. We're supposed to be adding value to products, and we don't do a very good job of that here in Canada. When I was the MP in downtown Winnipeg, I had the visit from the Turkish ambassador. He was here in Manitoba to visit agriculture because he wanted to know more about pulses and to shore up the trade relationships with pulses, so lentils and things like that. And so I had a long discussion with him about that. And essentially, we sell our pulses or lentils to Turkey. They clean them, look after them, package them, and then they resell them back to us after they've been added value to. And so
Kidding.
Yeah. So we are still the hewers and the drawers of water.
Wow.
But that's one of the problems here is we're not doing a good job of actually making sure we continue to add value. Like even in pork, the airport for Winnipeg, it had one point a project before the pandemic to export live pigs on cargo planes to China, where they would do this, finish off the raising and slaughtering. And so we lose out on, that final end product where we just get a few extra percentage points off of value off the products that we started producing, and to sell them, finished product that they want to consume and pay a better price for. Because even we do that in the eel fishery in Atlantic Canada, you baby eels, they're a huge fight between Indigenous fishermen and Atlantic fishermen right now in Atlantic Canada about baby eels. Well, they capture them and they ship them to China. They're raised, then they're processed and then eaten by China. But we should be raising those ourselves to add value to it.
For Pete's sake! So instead of sending all those lentils, pork, and what did you say, baby eels on a one-way flight to China?
I know it
and then
sounds
shipping
strange,
them
baby
back.
eels. I never thought it would
crazy.
anyone want to eat an eel, but apparently it's very good in sushi. So,
what do you think, Marco? Would you eat a baby eel from who knows where?
I have trouble imagining that I would eat a baby anything, but I agree. I agree with Robert, but I would add this: there are really no free traders in this country. No one has really stood out among the elected officials and stood for free trade. Look, let me give you an example. If we believe in the rule of law, and someone else is breaking the rule of law, to be intellectually consistent and honest, we would try to combat crime while still upholding the rule of law. In other words, it's not
Mm.
because somebody else is breaking the law that somebody who believes in the rule of law should break it. And if we apply that logic to free trade, then the Canadian response from real free traders should be to continue to uphold the principles of free trade. In other words, if Trump is violating those principles, the way to combat it is exactly to continue to uphold the principles of free trade. But the
Ah,
reality is, the tit for tat betrays that we are not really fundamentally and at heart free traders in this country. And the internal dynamics of our trade also speak to that. And so
okay. So
we shouldn't be under the delusion that because people are paying lip service to free trade now and trade, interprovincial trade, that they are actually free traders or that they actually believe in the benefits of it.
Now, actually, I have to agree with Marco. I think perhaps when Trump started placing tariffs or threatening to put tariffs on our products, I think we came back with a very emotional response and,
mhm.
very angry. We'll match you dollar for dollar. We're going to Target. And I'm not sure now that was the appropriate response. I think we needed a bit more cooler heads uh, to think
Mm.
about that, because we see what's going on with China and the United States. China's come back with retaliatory tariffs, and Trump keeps upping the ante and upping it again, and
Mhm.
and they've
And
come
Carney is
back
not
more.
saying anything about those.
No, but we need to. I think if we were playing the long game, you know, yes, there are, we can get angry and we can point out the things that this will do to the economy and the impacts it will have. But at the same time, I think it seems that the US administration, the way that they best function is when you rub the cat or the eagle, with the direction of the feathers and not against the direction of the feathers. And I don't think Trump likes being rubbed the wrong way. He seems to be, he has a very strong ego, and I think we need to be doing a better job of ensuring that he feels that we're there to support him, or not support perhaps is the word, but at least know that we're still at least cousins or brothers on the same continent, and we wanted to work together. We had this marriage with Brian Mulroney and Ronald Reagan for free
Wow.
trade back 40 years ago, and we still want this marriage to work.
I think
Yeah,
that's
I
good
think
advice.
Canada and the Canadian leadership has essentially undermined its own position by acting Trump-like and sometimes even more so than Trump himself.
And what is your thesis? Why are they doing that, Marco? To ask a dumb question.
It's kind of there is a tendency to believe that populism is only a right-wing thing, but it is patently evident, for example, that Prime Minister Trudeau was through and through populist. And so we live in a kind of a populist time, and so the principal issue in populism is that leaders don't lead, but leaders follow the popular sentiment. And so the popular sentiment is one of a kind of a juvenile anger and a
Mm.
juvenile sense of retribution to the other. And so we should not be under the delusion that the people who are portraying themselves as leaders are actually leaders; they are followers.
Oh, for Pete's sake! So you're actually calling us out, both of you, that we need to elevate the level of thinking, elevate the level of policy that actually serves Canadians, and not short-term political gain here. And I think that's a dynamite conversation, and we're getting a lot of terrific comments from the audience here. Um,
Well, I
I,
remember, I don't know if you've watched what the UK has been doing. They've been quite interesting in their dealings with the United States. And they did that in the first term as well. Obviously, they have Brexit, so they feel a little bit lonely out there because they're out of the EU, and
Right.
so they don't have all those trade agreements that they had before. And but they've been working to find a way to invite, President Trump for a state visit. Again, he did meet the Queen for a large state visit, and I think that goes to the sense of who Donald Trump wants to be, and he wants to be seen as important and acknowledged as being important. And, I remember in 2016, we invited Barack Obama to give a speech before the joint parliament, the House of Commons and the Senate, with the Supreme Courts and other dignitaries. We didn't do that for Donald Trump, and it was more of a, an adversarial relationship, even at that time. And I think it kind of degraded over time. And I don't think we did a good job on that diplomacy front. There's something that we could have done better in the longer term.
But to pick up your comments earlier, which I think was a brilliant analogy, is let us work with the right positioning of the feathers on the eagle. Don't go in the opposite direction, Robert. And it seems to me that it's interesting, like Mark Carney is the new prime minister. His first trip diplomatically was to the European continent. It was not to the United States. So right there, you're signaling an antagonistic view of the United States. Am I reading too much into this? I mean, the history.
I think that I'm not sure that was to be well, maybe it was antagonistic with the United States, but I think he was going maybe showing off a little bit. He was living in England for a long time, and if he's only prime minister for a month and a bit, at least he had the opportunity of going to England as the prime minister, the right honorable, and going to France and to meet the president and receive all those honors in the military band with the flags and the little marching parade.
I think that he was thumbing his nose at the president of the United States in some respects, but also in a sense also fleeing from the president of the United States. He campaigned during the leadership for the Liberal Party as him being the one man who could stand up to Trump. And so soon upon being selected leader, instead of standing up to Trump, he puts an entire ocean in between them. And so one has to wonder, I think is kind of half and a half. Is a little bit of fear of standing in front of Trump. And look, Trump is an intimidating guy. Let's call it for what it is. But at the same time, he campaigned on it. I tend to agree a bit with Robert that he also wanted.
But it also gave an opportunity.
His European roots.
But it also gave an opportunity for Mark Carney not to have to deal with media just after his election as the Liberal leader and prime minister. He could essentially have that international stage, and there's kind of a bit of a convention that the leader of the opposition and other politicians don't attack you in the local media or the national media don't attack the leader when they're overseas. And so it gave him an opportunity to seem prime ministerial, reduce the amount of criticism, and kind of push to the side the Conservatives and the NDP, and gave Mark Carney, free reign and free field, kind of an open field to himself for at least 3-4 days, on a level. On one level, it's actually quite brilliant strategically. I'm still not certain what the purpose was. But
well, that is true. But if you're going to argue tradition, the tradition has simply been that new prime ministers go to Washington first.
Yes, that's supposed to be the first call they make, and it's supposed to be the last call they make because we live so close.
It's a very interesting discussion. So we have a number of comments from the audience here. One is, I disagree with ego part. Why can't we have a healthy competition? Why build Canada to be itself and be good in what it does and encourage innovation? So well said. We need to build our country. So on that note, I do have some interesting clips to share in terms of announcements on the policy side by all three parties. One is with, of course, Prime Minister Carney, who talks about the CBC and bringing in additional funding.
If elected, my government will take action to enshrine and protect and strengthen CBC Radio Canada for generations to come. We will modernize the mandate of our public broadcaster. We will give it the resources it needs to fulfill its renewed mission and ensure that its future is guided by all Canadians and not subject to the whims of a small group of people led by ideology. When it comes to this most important of Canadian institutions, all Canadians should have their say, not just a small group. We will not only increase CBC Radio Canada's funding by $150 million, but we will also make this funding statutory, meaning that Parliament as a whole will need to approve any future changes to its funding, not just the Cabinet.
Okay, so there you have it. Was that a surprise to you, Marco, that announcement to actually
Again,
build the CBC?
these things drip in irony, right? He's talking about what Canadians perceive as to be one of the most Canadian institutions. And at the same time, he can't get the language straight saying that his government is going to be elected. We do not elect governments in this country, we form them. And it's the same as in Britain. So, speaking about heritage, the Prime Minister doesn't understand the very nature of how government works in this country. It is a surprise to me, to some extent, that he is continuing this idea of entrenching the CBC funding into law, basically, that it would require Parliament. But at the same time, it doesn't, because the reality is that the progressives depend a great deal on the power of the media to move their message, and so this is a kind of a dog whistle to the media out there that they need to get in line.
Okay, what do you say, Robert?
Well, I think it's good to remind your base and perhaps those who support the NDP in the country that you support the NDP, and perhaps 150 million would be something that was already pre-budgeted. It probably, with inflation, is not worth very much today that it was 10 years ago. But and I'd also have to kind of say that, you know, any time you change a budget anywhere, you have to get parliamentary approval. It doesn't, you put it in a budget, you have an omnibus budget, you can change many different laws, and it could be a budget of 400 pages, you know, stacked this high, and you have to go through it line by line. I've done it on about 3 occasions. It's quite interesting. It's long, tedious process, and you can hide lots of fun little things in those budgets. But in this case, any future government, if they really decided that they did not want to increase, keep that statutory requirement, as he was talking about, could remove it. But it's a good way of reminding your base that this is what you believe in. And also, as Marco was talking about, a dog whistle, it kind of sends a message to those who are kind of on the fence, that like the CBC, but perhaps upset with the Liberals. Maybe I won't go with the Conservatives because maybe they're going to cut something I like, and I like my news and I like my radio programs, and it's on TV, and I'll go back. I'll stay with the Liberals, or maybe worst off, I'll go with the NDP.
But it is a very interesting signal, as both of you have alluded to their base that sees it as a quote symbol of Canadiana. But it is interesting because, in contrast, you have a number of principled commitments by the Conservatives to frankly defund the CBC. There's a lot of skepticism about the legacy media as being frankly biased and on the public dole, and that's something unusual in this country.
Well, I think all the media are on the public dole, or many of the print media, anyways, with the how the funding works.
Yeah.
But I also enjoyed what he was talking, or thought it was interesting what he was talking about, a small elite controlling the CBC or protecting against a small elite. And I think that could actually be seen perhaps on both sides. You could have a Conservative or someone who might not like the CBC getting in control, but even an elite that makes the CBC not accessible to more Canadians. And I think that's been one of the main issues with the CBC. It's not always the most accessible for a lot of Canadians. It's not as interesting. I know they're attempting to do things a certain way or a bit differently, but sometimes the programming, it's not the same as it is in French versus English. It does speak to a certain political way of thinking, often a philosophy, which is not always favorable to how everyone thinks across the country. They don't always take into consideration how they think in Alberta or Saskatchewan, and doesn't share that with the rest of the country. It's very an Ontario, Quebec-centered type of media. And I think that's one of the main problems. A lot of the regional offices have been cut over the years, and it's become very Toronto-centric. and it's to the detriment of Canada. Even children's programming. The CBC used to have really good children's programming. It's a little less so than it used to be.
No, I think that's a very good point, and the overarching theme is, quite frankly, the CBC audience is quite tiny now, and so that's a real problem. The other clip I wanted to share had to do with a comment by Pierre Poilievre about the whole realm of taxation.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre took aim at Mark Carney today with a pitch to close offshore tax loopholes.
Mark Carney, like all Liberals, is a high tax hypocrite, making you pay more while he dodges his bill.
The Conservatives have criticized Carney for using offshore tax havens during his time as chair of Brookfield Asset Management. CTV News previously reported Brookfield registered several of its entities in Bermuda, a country that has no corporate income tax. Asked today whether a Liberal government would condemn the use of tax havens, Carney had this to say.
What's important is that we have a effective tax system, and that companies, every company, follows the rules of those tax to not just the letter but the spirit of those regulations.
Carney has maintained he always followed the rules. Now Poilievre's Conservatives are pitching changing them.
We will target tax havens, expose offshore fortunes, and bring the money home. All of this with the goal of reducing the tax burden on the people in this country.
So what do you think about that announcement, Robert? Is this a winning policy as they look at so-called stopping these tax havens, but then also going after the leader of the Liberal Party in this context because it seems to be relevant? Oops, I think the sound is off here.
It's a bit of deja vu for me. I remember in 2016, I was on the finance committee with Pierre, and we were analyzing and reviewing the Panama Papers about the tax havens down there.
Oh, yes.
And which was a big scandal. And there were a lot of recommendations that we put forward, but the governments didn't seem to be really interested. And it seems to be that, yes, the rules are the rules and everyone follows the rules. But for instance, you could have an accounting firm. And they're not doing tax evasion. They're just counseling to reduce your tax bill, which is not illegal to reduce your tax bill. But at the same time, they work with a lawyer who's part of the firm, and that ensures that any of the discussions that occur around taxation for the individual, that the accountant cannot reveal any information to other entities because the lawyer is held to client solicitor privilege. And so this is meaning you have to keep the conversation secret. And so this is a major issue. I think on the finance committee, there was kind of slight quiet rumblings that we were hearing from the finance department that maybe we don't want to adjust the system too much because Canada is a net beneficiary in many ways as a tax haven itself, and allowing money from other countries around the world to come through Canada, whether it's China in Toronto into the housing market, to change money to make it different from a lot of dictatorships, and then it's repatriated outside and kind of invested a little bit in the Canadian economy. And there's a lot of benefit to the Canadian economy. Whether that's a good public policy is another question, but we do know that there are less and less people paying taxes over the long term. We all pay taxes, obviously, but there is a certain segment of the population who are not the ultra rich, nor even the rich, but the middle class that actually support most of the Canadian state. And there are groups that don't do their fair share here in the country in trying to ensure we have good public services. And it creates this distortion where we just don't have the funds to do what we should be doing, fixing the roads, fixing our infrastructure, because we just can't afford it.
Very good points. Marco?
Yeah, there is a sense in many corners of the world that Canada in the last 15 years or so has become one giant laundromat. That there are, and we have heard this from several different places, that all sorts of illicit monies through triads and drug cartels, often involved with actual state actors in governments, are funneling money through Canadian enterprises, buying property, and so forth. And so there is the criminal aspect of it, which it's important to look at. I agree with Robert that governments aren't always interested because it is a source of income that essentially boosts local economies and what have you. But as the question of foreign interference also brings, because whoever has money often calls the shots, it's an important feature here. And so Canadians should demand that these practices actually be curbed or stopped altogether, because it is essentially bringing criminal element into the country that in the long run we're going to pay a heavy price for.
But the
Yeah, no,
interesting thing that could actually happen if Mark Carney did become the prime minister, not just the interim prime minister, but the proper, elected prime minister with a proper mandate, he might be the one best placed to actually reform some of this system and work with other governments around the world to reform that, to make sure it's a little bit more beneficial for national governments and taxation issues. Because he does have a good understanding of what's going on. I know Brookfield do have, I think they're up to 3 tax haven accounts, or at least funds that have kind of filtered through the Bahamas at, I think it's, what's the street address? 729 Front Street or something like that in the Bahamas, in the capital, which is actually kind of a funny name to think, Front Street.
Yeah, and I understand it's above a bicycle shop. I'm like, comical. Yeah, so tax policy is a big issue for everyone, including Jagmeet Singh.
Well, Jagmeet's been kind of empty or evacuated from this whole debate. We haven't heard much about him, and he should be talking more.
So we're gonna play this clip where I think he's making a statement around this issue.
This is an example of the difference between us and them. We believe that everybody in our country should be paying their fair share. And when hardworking people are filling out their taxes, we're in tax season, and they see that a company that makes massive profits in Canada decides to register in a foreign country, they're like, well, I can't do that. I can't just change my address and make my address Bermuda and not pay my taxes. And what does it say about the person that was the chair of that company? It says that they think, that Mark Carney thinks it's okay to not contribute to the Canadian economy. It means it's okay not to support families. It's okay not to invest in the healthcare that we need. It shows you that he doesn't have the right priorities. And it shows you that as a party, the Liberals have let you down.
I want to jump in real quick, David.
Yes, please.
Because I was there. I'm in Winnipeg, and I listened to the leaders. The one came, Pierre came on Sunday. Mark was here on Tuesday. Jagmeet was here on Wednesday. And in none of his prepared remarks, in what was actually written in his speech, did he include anything about any of those issues. It was all about Trump and tariffs. It was only during the question period when he took questions from media that he actually started talking about that. And so it didn't seem to be a major part of his platform. And I think it's one of the issues of the NDP. They're not talking to their base. They need to be talking more about this, and not just kind of as an afterthought, but really getting down to the central part. And he needs to go hard on Mark Carney. And I don't think he's doing it enough.
Isn't that interesting? So what is your thesis there, that somehow the NDP are trying to figure out tactically in the election how to pivot to an issue that would resonate? Your suggestion is it would resonate better with his base if he talks more about so-called tax unfairness. Is that right?
He's got to talk to his base. I don't think he's talking to his base. I think he's talking, he's trying to sound like Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, and I don't think he's going to be them. And he needs to make sure that he mobilizes the people who might likely vote for him and tell them why it's important to have someone like him in Parliament. And he needs to get past the 7-8% up to at least 10, 11, 12% to have any chance to have an actual caucus in the House of Commons and a voice. Otherwise, they're all going to be sitting around as an unofficial party, independents with no power, not even on any committees, because they independents don't sit on committees. They can attend, but they don't get the chance to speak. They'll be essentially powerless if it's in a majority government for 4 years. And he needs to get Jagmeet needs to get his act in order and talk to his base, the ones who are likely to vote for him.
Well, it's an urgent
Yeah,
time. Marco?
in any place, even in Canada, there is always a market for left of center ideas. Um, and that hasn't changed. What has changed is that the NDP has essentially abandoned its principles and abandoned the roots of the movement. Um, we forget, for example, that one of the key aspects of the NDP, the CCF, was a Christian movement out of the prairies, for example, and they have completely abandoned that aspect of things and gone in a completely different direction, but not just different, but separate. Indeed, sort of a cutoff from that in all this insistence on DEI and whatnot. But even when they bring out economic issues like poverty and whatnot, I'm not entirely sure that going after the grocers is a good idea, precisely because it wears thin the fact that not only did he misrepresent the fact that they were making X number of dollars in relation to profit, so he got it completely wrong, but people are kind of tired of that sort of attack and divisiveness. One of the things that used to be about the NDP is that they try to elevate the political discourse in a kind of a sort of a moral tone, not moralistic, but moral tone. And they have lost that ground too. So whoever succeeds Jagmeet, because I don't think he's going to last this debacle, need to go back and really take a hard look at what the roots of the labor and the sort of left of center movement in this country really are, and rebuild from there.
No, it's a fascinating discussion. I also have an interesting comment here. It's there's a C. Hegg says, "Great to be back. No housing under whose policies for the last 10 years." So I think that's a typical question is within the election, people want to talk, obviously parties want to talk about their agenda. And so with Carney, it's not in his interest to talk about the last 10 years, is it? I mean, that's the record.
No, what they do is completely gaslight the entire country, as though they have never been involved in making promises about housing or anything like that. And all of a sudden, they come up with this idea that they're going to build, thousands and hundreds of thousands of houses, which, of course, people who know a bit about these things understand that it is kind of laughable to make promises that the governments are going to be building houses when this very party, I mean, we haven't talked about this, but this week alone, the prime minister has had a pretty rough time, considering that he lost the candidate for Markham, and then they put another one in who is now in an enormous amount of hot water because he is also a kind of in the loop with the Beijing sympathizers in this country, and he's very much in favor of, for example, annexing Taiwan, which is just off the charts pro-Beijing. My point about this is this: if this is a party that cannot even vet a candidate to run in a riding that has already been disastrous for them, how are they going to organize themselves to build 500,000 houses a year? One has to ask the question.
Well, I
Gosh,
think I think for me, this is a huge issue related not just to housing, but also immigration. The government's been talking about more housing. It's very expensive to build housing, and obviously governments are not well equipped to build housing. They're good at certain things and they're not good at everything, and they shouldn't take the place of private business that often can do a better job and people's own personal desires. The economy has a role to play in that, and private enterprise and construction companies and entrepreneurs, they should be the ones really heading this up, and we should be allowing, ensuring the rules and regulations are better placed. But I haven't heard as much as I'd like about immigration and the impact it's had. The Liberals during the pandemic allowed more immigration to increase. Then we've cut it off. The impacts this has had on the universities is going to be substantial in Ontario. There are many cuts to many of the programs going on right now, right across Ontario. They're looking at eliminating whole swaths of programs. And I know sometimes people think to themselves, well, it's not important to have everything. Well, the University of Ottawa, as an example, is looking at removing their language interpretation program. And the crazy thing about that is the House of Commons lacks interpreters and translators in the House of Commons to work. And that means the work of Parliament will be more and more difficult and might not be able to ensure that we meet our statutory requirements for bilingualism in the country, because they create situations where they cut the immigration and the ability to have a certain number of international students that can do good things, that contribute to the economy in the long term, have families, buy homes. But you have to do it in a sustained way. And I don't think we've come up with I don't think we've come up with a proper policy. We had one, I think, before that was working, and it was slight adjustments here and there. And then all of a sudden, after the pandemic, we decided to, rip that playbook apart and do something absolutely crazy. And now we're having huge issues with it. But the housing is also related to a lot to this money laundering. If you need to purchase a home and you go to Toronto and you see it keep rising and you don't really care how much it costs, because you need to make sure you get $1 million out of your country into another country, which G7, which makes it really the money look good, you're going to invest. How many of those homes in Vancouver are empty in certain neighborhoods? I've heard of people going around with heat cameras looking, and there's no one living in those homes because they're essentially just shells. I think Meng Wanzhou from Huawei, when she was arrested, I think she had 3 homes in Vancouver. She was house arrested in one of them, but that means 2 were sitting empty.
No, it's a complicated issue. I know that at Frontier we do a lot of research on housing. Certainly one of the key variables to that is being able to free up land for people to build houses. And that's one of the challenges in some of these markets. And because if you look at the price of a house, it's actually the majority part of it is the price of the land. It's really quite incredible and very important to the future of this country. So we've got a lot of other things to discuss here. I know we've covered a lot of ground to date, but it's very interesting, the whole issue of foreign interference in our democratic institutions. We know that we had the Hogue Commission. There's been concerns about that. Now, it's interesting, the scope of the Hogue Commission that was tasked with looking into this issue had a particular type of scope. But the point is that we know there's example after example of foreign interference. And something very interesting came up this last week, and it had to do with WeChat. And I wanted to share that because this is from federal government officials who announced the issue of Chinese interference through WeChat.
We are aware of an information operation targeting the 45th general election on the social media platform WeChat. The information operation was launched by Yoli Yomien, WeChat's most popular news account. Intelligence reporting links the Yoli Yomien account to the PRC, Chinese Communist Party's Central Political and Legal Affairs Commission. The content of this information operation contains story about the Prime Minister, Liberal Party of Canada leader, and candidate in Nepean, Mark Carney. This content has been amplified in a coordinated and inauthentic way. This information operation had contrasting positive and negative narratives, first amplifying Mr. Carney's stance with the United States, and then targeting his experience and credentials.
So there you have it. Were you surprised by that? Who wants to go first, Marco?
I was not to hear the content of the report. I was that we were hearing the report at all in the middle of
I
an
agree.
election,
Yes.
considering that some of the intelligence services and the security services have sometimes played interference with and along the prime minister, and they have been somewhat politically motivated or under the political thumb of the PMO or what have you. And so it is clearly a revelation that this has been discussed and has been announced in the middle of an election. But it's kind of inane in a sense, right? That they have amplified the prime minister's message, considering the level of foreign interference that we have seen before and that had been uncovered before. What I would like to know is if this is the kind of stuff that they're willing to talk about, what else is going on?
Interesting. What do you say, Robert?
Well, I simply don't think that our security services should be participating in any way in this election. I know they've done this now. This is the second occasion that they've done so. There were criticisms of the leader of the loyal opposition, Pierre Poilievre,
Yes,
at the beginning of the
that's right.
campaign. We often
Yeah.
forget about that. I think that was completely uncalled for. This reminds me of what happened against Paul Martin with the RCMP and Ralph Goodale back in 2006. I think these are government civil servants. They are in caretaker mode. Things are going to play out how they're going to play out. And unless it's going to have a major impact, they should not be participating in the political debate, because we cannot verify or rectify this information in a timely way. The candidates, the prime minister and others are deeply involved in running a campaign, and they don't have time to be trying to control what China is doing. But I will say we have had foreign interference in the past for at least as long as Canada has been around. Just 100 years ago, it was British foreign interference, because most of the people here in Canada had lots of British subjects, but they were a democratic country, which was often seen as the motherland or the homeland for many Canadians, and it was seen positively. Today, we have people that come from all around the world, and the problem is that many of these, some of the countries that they come from, they flee from countries which do not respect basic human rights, do not respect the rule of law, do have very different basic political cultures. And this, I think, for me, is perhaps the gravest concern, because they're going to try and impose those types of cultures on us. And I think in the long term, this could represent huge issues because we haven't been very good at weeding out what's going on. We don't have a very open system, for instance, with candidate selection, knowing who is being elected, how, when. You don't even need to be a Canadian citizen to vote in a leadership contest here in the country. Whether it's the Conservatives, the Liberals, you can just be a PR, a permanent resident, and if you pay or you sign up, you can vote.
But I like what you're doing is you're elevating the conversation here in the sense that you're pointing out, why is it that you have federal bureaucrats, in this case, getting involved in a public campaign in this time? It begs questions there. Is there not?
Who are they working for?
And that was kind of my point. That was kind of my point. By saying, of all the inane things to point out that somebody in social media is amplifying somebody else, when we still have 1.5 million questions, for example, about the infiltration of the Winnipeg lab, right? And where there's real interference, real espionage, and may have been involved in the propagation of a virus that caused a pandemic. So there are real security issues that the security forces should be involved, and they need to be done behind closed doors, because part of the security of the nation is at stake. But to have inane announcements like this in the middle of it begs the question.
Very good. So lots to unpack there. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Trump administration. And just before I dive into that, I just want to remind the audience that I'm talking with the great Robert Falcon-Ouellette, former Liberal MP and professor at University of Ottawa, as well as Dr. Navarro Gini, who is the Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier. So we're having this delightful conversation with the audience. Lots of great comments keep coming in here. And it's interesting. Dom Johnson says, I thought that the comments here were from... I'm not sure if I can read that. You realize that they obviously bots are Chinese. It's really an issue. Anybody's on social media realizes there's a lot of animated um, robots or bots, as they call them.
How do you
And
set up these
so,
bots? I've always wondered, as a recovering politician, I would love to have a whole army of bots defending
I
me
know.
online.
It's really something, but we do need to be skeptical. So we know that the big news this last 2 days has been, as we've been whipsawed by ups and downs of the stock market, the pause on tariffs now for 90 days. And it's a fascinating set of strategies that are unfolding as the US seeks to, quote, rebalance trade. They would claim they are free traders. They're pursuing fair and free trade. And they emphasize the principle of reciprocity, e.g., if you charge us zero, we'll charge you zero. Or if you charge us 50%, we'll charge you 50%. Now, this is notwithstanding interesting debates around the edges around, well, are you carrying your defense load? I mean, of course, one of the criticisms of Canada is that we are defense freeloaders. We don't fulfill our NATO contracts. But also, we have some security issues in this country, and then you can debate about that, whether or not that's fair. But the point is, what's remarkable, and this is my last count at 6 a.m. this morning, is you've got some 77 countries on the way to Washington that have phoned up the president personally and are seeking a new deal. You have the first, I believe, the first entree to making a deal happened last week already, where Israel said that we will commit to reciprocity at zero. It begs the question, why isn't Canada doing similarly? But it's interesting. We have a lot of things in play here. We've got a lot of countries coming to bear here. And I want to share with you a very interesting tweet from the president. I want to read it. It says, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I hereby am raising the tariff charge to China by the United States of America to 125% effective immediately. So the tweet goes on there to kind of wrap up the basic headline there. But what's fascinating is that with this reprieve, you have all these countries knocking on the door of the White House seeking a deal. But China is isolated now in the world. But I do want to bring up an interesting chart here that shows kind of an interesting summary of the state of affairs here. We've got a series of responses to the Trump tariffs. We've got people who are, or countries, pardon me, negotiating to trade. You've got South Korea, you've got France, Brazil, a myriad of them, Turkey, Argentina, and offered concessions. They've actually proactively offered concessions. And there you have a whole myriad of countries there again, including Taiwan. And the countries that have done no retaliation on the right side here are listed there. Possible retaliation is EU. Now, I want to update that in a second. The countries that have chosen to retaliate are two, to my knowledge, and they are China and Canada. So we are kind of isolated now with China, of all things. And the rhetoric has been pretty steady as being fairly aggressive with the United States. So I think, are we being isolated with China? Because to the information, my sources may be incorrect, so please bear with me. It's a bit of a dynamic situation here. Is that the first in line for a deal now are none other than South Korea, Japan, and what is the third one? I believe it's the EU, of course. So I find this fascinating because Canadians, we often take pride that we are close to the United States. We are cousins, we are friends, to use your language, Robert. And yet the eagle is kind of flying in the direction of those countries. So are we being outpositioned here because of an election? What any thoughts on that? Do you want to go first, Marco, and then Robert?
I am of the view that things would look fundamentally different were we not in the middle of an election. Let's remember how this started in a way. It started with a weak prime minister in the middle of essentially a cycle where he was being pushed out, who decided that he was going to out Trump by going to Mar-a-Lago and seem presidential in a way,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
and deal with the president. And in the process of that conversation, he sort of whined, I mean, quite literally, apparently, about that if the United States went on and implemented these tariffs, that the existence of the country would be in question. In other words, sort of reveal this massive weakness to this sort of, president of the United States who has no problems with ego and with sort of imperial designs. So that's really the ground zero for this thing. And then, of course, we have the collapse of the Trudeau government and all this turmoil in the middle of what essentially became an election cycle. And so politics is a theater of illusion at the best of times, but during elections, illusion is almost everything. And so I am not at all surprised that we are here where we are now. And I am kind of convinced that it might have been similar, but not nearly as bad as it has become because we are in the middle of an election cycle.
Any thoughts, Robert?
Well, I also think there's an issue. A lot of Canadians believe Canada's, the greatest country in the world. We hear, opinion polls, and we compare ourselves to all the other countries and, best places to live. And, we place consistently near the top. I think at the end of the day, perhaps that got the better of us because we looked at ourselves and said, well, we're not Mexico. We should be able to stand up for ourselves. We fought the Americans in the past. We've won. We won the War of 1812. And maybe we needed to have a bit of a cooler head in the beginning, maybe because Trudeau was quite a bit lame duck and very weak at that period. He needed to show that he was very strong and thump the chest. And I'm not sure that it's not good to be isolated. Sometimes it's good to be out front, but not the front person doing something. We should be either sitting quietly with Mexico, waiting for things to play out, to see what happens, talking to them. They are an ally in the NAFTA or the NACA agreement, our free trade agreement, which we did agree to, I believe in. It's not even that old. It's just not even a decade old, and I think it's really quite important for us to really think about what we're doing. And maybe Mark Carney is not a bad choice for that. He's rather bland, calm. I'm not sure if he's super flustered. The Bank of Canada, when you ask them to consider things, they think not week to week. Usually they're thinking a little bit longer term, by quarter at least. Pierre Poilievre as well has his strengths, but it is, as Marco mentioned, it is an election campaign, and people want to see strength, and they want to display that strength. It's a bit of a battle of the great gorilla apes in the jungle. Who's got the biggest chest and who makes the most sound?
What worries me really is that Canadians have no real choice when it comes to this nonsense. That nearly every candidate in every party, with the exception perhaps of Maxime Bernier, and we can talk about that, are all on the same side, screaming bloody blue murder, that even in sort of bellicose war-like language, trying to pit us against the Americans. And that is absolute nonsense. We have no better friend in the world than the United States and the people of the United States, regardless of who it is in office.
Okay, very, very good discussion, gentlemen. One of the comments I made, it's on the audience, was from Karen, that I'm wondering if we can bring up. It says, this is from Karen. She says, seeing Carney has no platform. The Liberals' platform was to fight Trump, act prime ministerial, and copy the conservative policies. So there's probably some truth to that. But the larger picture is that we really have to be clear-minded when it comes to what policies are going to serve and rebuild this incredible country. And we can't, as Robert, as you alluded to, take this for granted and kind of just assume that we are really competitive on the international side to it. I mean, if you go back to our conversation about tax policy, I'm very concerned that Canada is just simply not competitive on that file, and that helps explain why we've seen just hundreds of billions of dollars leave this country and people to boot. So, we've really got to hustle to get our country moving again.
Yeah, but it's not even about comparing ourselves internationally. It's about ensuring that people who, when they make a dollar and they decide to save that dollar, if they wish to invest that dollar
Yeah,
in the
right.
local economy, and we're not
Yeah.
talking large multinationals, we're talking the local small business person that
Mhm.
wants to do something good for their community, wants to open up a bubble tea shop or something, has
Yes.
enough capital that they can do it, because the bank's not going to give them any money, but they got the $50,000, the $100,000 that they can go and rent a storefront and take the risk to do something. But
Right on.
once again, all of this is connected. In Winnipeg, huge crime issues.
Mhm.
Who wants to
Yes.
open up a store in the downtown centers when it's going to get broken into and trashed, when there's people doing drugs and sleeping on the streets? And people don't want to go downtown; they want to stay in certain areas of the neighborhood, and it creates
Mhm.
this very ghetto feeling. And I think it's
Yeah.
not just Winnipeg having those issues. I think many different parts of the country are having this,
Mhm.
and all of this is interconnected. Indigenous peoples, we often talk about this idea of
Mhm.
holism. You can't just isolate one thing. You change one
Yes.
little policy, it might have an impact over here, and you have to take your time to think about all of it. And governments often don't do that. They make snap decisions in
Mhm.
isolation. They don't speak to one another very well. I'm going to change immigration policy. Well, what's the impact on education? What's the
Indeed.
impact on housing? No one talks about it, because no one thought it would be important. But I'm in charge of immigration. I'm going to make that big decision. But you need to think about everything, even on the healthcare system.
Well said. Well said. We need to think about how these dots get connected and the impact Canadians. I think the immigration file is a really good example where we know as well the impacts on all these other services at other levels of government, including, persons getting all those health cards and creating even longer wait lists. So this is a huge point. It's interesting as well that I think these policies have an impact on as well on issues of national unity. And when we look at the differences, and I know it's a strange time where the Liberals really haven't revealed the full platform, but one of the things they have revealed is the continued support, and I think Marco, you alluded to this a while ago, the continued support for Bill C-69, the so-called No Pipelines bill. So one of the things that's come forward has been the Honorable Preston Manning, the former leader of the opposition, founder of the Reform Party, talking about how you had concerns that this issue is going to divide our country. It's going to stoke the fire, so to speak, for Western alienation. Do you think that's a real issue, Marco? When you look at that policy issue where the war on Canadian oil and gas is likely to continue with a Carney government?
Absolutely. And let me address that by sort of picking up a thread of what Robert said just a minute ago that I find very interesting, and it's also related to this idea of being in the middle of an election. Um, there needs to be some kind of awareness um, by us, the electorate, of what is Canada and what does it mean to be Canadian? Because
Mm.
if we are
Mm.
going to make choices about policy and about politics that put the country first, if we're going to put Canada first, we need to answer the question, what is Canada? If we're going to put Canadians first, we need to answer the question, what does it mean to be Canadian? And we don't
Mm.
have definitive answers for that. And when we don't, we become essentially praise to all this politicking. I am not trying to sort of minimize political parties. They're important sort of informal institutions, but the reality is political parties, their purpose is to get to power, and we live in a time in which they will say anything and do anything to get to office. And so Canadians need to be able to demonstrate to themselves that what the politicians are saying is often for the good of their political party and the good of their political interests, but not necessarily for the good of the country. And so back to your question about pipelines and energy. The development of energy and economic development is a good in and of itself with certain guardrails. Uh, and so we got to make sure that it's ethical. We got to make sure that it doesn't kill
Mhm.
people. We got to make
Mhm.
sure that it doesn't crush communities and so forth. And we know what those guardrails are. But the complete dismissal of the development of energy, which, by the way, it really means Western energy, because we forget that Nova Scotia produces oil and gas, or used to. They're now down to a trickle. That Newfoundland produces oil and gas, but they are of a different ilk of producers because they cater to the European market. They get paid in Brent prices and so forth. Uh, Alberta and Saskatchewan specifically are landlocked, and that means we are dependent of this very poor neighborhood that is called British Columbia, and then at the other end, Quebec, that has got our goods trapped. And so, in that sense, it becomes a national unity issue because the production and marketing of these energy goods run against the quasi religion of central Canada and, in particular,
Hmm.
Quebec.
What do you say, Robert?
I think that is certainly, there's a lot of truth to that. There are a lot of issues with how do we get resources to tidewater. We haven't been very successful at it. But I also think in this election, I think we've seen a bit of a change in the two major political parties, what they're both talking about. I think there's going to be a more of an appetite for, ensuring that our resources are more developed. But again, the question is, are we going to add any value to it? Are we refining any oil in Manitoba or in Ontario? If Quebec really doesn't want it, great. But can we refine it in some way in Ontario or load it up in the St. Lawrence Seaway and ship it somewhere else where they do want it? Because I think, and there's another issue that I think, one Pierre was attacked on by media, but Mark Carney wasn't attacked on, is this idea of consultations with Indigenous peoples. Now, Mark has been talking about more oil, but he wasn't attacked because he didn't mention Indigenous peoples. I know he hasn't mentioned Indigenous peoples in this campaign very much, but we do have a certain way of functioning within the government. And yes, we need to streamline how we do things, but at the same time, it doesn't mean we have to forego constitutional requirements, and especially to Indigenous peoples. And I think Indigenous peoples want to have the opportunity of benefiting themselves from the resources which are found on their traditional territories because they want jobs. I remember speaking with people when they were having the Site C Dam in British Columbia. There were some traditional people that were against it, but there were also people in the community that were working to build the dam and were happy to work, and they had good jobs. They were able to support their families, and that was important to them. So I think there's a lot of connection between the same needs of Canadians, whether you're Indigenous or just Canadian. And I think we need to be looking for those things, but it doesn't mean that we don't talk about all of these things. I think, and it's important that we discuss how to do those policies. I know during the provincial election, Doug Ford talked about the Ring of Fire in Ontario and the development of the Ring of Fire natural resources. Very little criticism. Pierre Poilievre did almost the exact same policy, a lot of criticism. And I thought that was quite interesting. And I'm not sure why that occurred, but at the end of the day, it's, I think all the governments, I know it's a new age and we don't like having a lot of diversity, but that's what makes our country a really great country. We are a group of nations inside a nation, the Quebecois nation, people from Alberta, British Columbia, different societies. You have Indigenous peoples, you have newcomers, French Canadians who are minority situation, Anglophones, which are not minority situations in Quebec. And we all live together. And we have had a consensus about how we work together well. We've managed to survive, this experiment of Canada for at least 400 years fairly well. And I don't think we should forget what has worked well. When we go against each other and we ignore those, and paper over those differences, I don't think we do well in the long term, but when we talk about them in a good way, I think we can actually see a lot more success, because I think then we feel more inclusive in the long term. And that would be my encouragement to Pierre. He should be talking about some of these issues. And yes, it might ruffle some feathers in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, but is anyone really against being more inclusive to people who want to have jobs and succeed in life, to have a good quality of life for them and their family? I don't think any Canadian's against that. I think we all want the same things.
Well said. I like your call for national unity here, Robert.
It is a worthy cause to call for national unity, but things are not working well. Things have not worked well for the last 400 years, and Alberta and Saskatchewan has been receiving the short end of the stick from 1905 onwards, and this is not going to get solved by the same kind of ideas that has.
But here's an interesting thing, Marco. Like, this is one thing people don't talk about. Hold on. I just want to think about
I'm
Norway.
still answering the question. I'm still trying to answer the question about Manning, and Manning is absolutely right. Right? Central Canada can have what it wants, but not Alberta, and the other way around. And it sounds like an ultimatum, but it's simply a statement of reality that Albertans are not going to take this lying down anymore. We've endured the last 10 years of this regime trying to trap our livelihood, and we're simply not going to lie down and take it.
But I will say that, for instance, I don't think we've developed our resources and nurtured those resources in a good way. For instance, Norway put a lot of their money into their sovereign economic, their fund, billions and billions of dollars. We haven't saved any of the resources, really, of what we've taken from the ground here in Canada, and we've just been spending it. And we spend it very quickly. And imagine if Canada had a trust fund of $1 trillion. Now, I know we have the CPP, but that's people's pensions that they've put aside. Canada hasn't been doing the same thing, and Alberta hasn't been doing the same thing. And this is probably the problem with the governments.
Apples and oranges, Robert. Apples and oranges.
Always.
When you say Norway, you say sovereign. And Alberta is not sovereign, neither is Saskatchewan. And the only sovereign is the state of Canada, to whom the resources do not belong. And so it's really comparing apples and oranges.
But the sovereignty of Canada is shared. We have a shared sovereignty, meaning that every
not when it
province
comes
has
to resources.
certain parts of their
not when it comes to the ownership of the resources. No.
Okay, so we have obviously a bit of a sub debate here going here, which is excellent. What I like though is that we are figuring out how do we develop our country in a prosperous way that benefits everybody. We can do that, but this is why this election is important. It's halftime, and we've had a very far-reaching conversation today. And I will tell you, it's interesting. One of the things that I find fascinating is, again, the question during this election is how do we promote Canadian identity and unity? And one of the things that has come up is, it's actually interesting, Marco, you've written a very interesting column that references a Beach Boys concert of all things as it relates to kind of a strain of anti-Americanism. And I wanted to share this video with you. It's a minute long, but I think I hope you get a bit of a chuckle from it as well as a thought-provoking thought here out of this.
In a time of anti-American sentiment in Canada, the Beach Boys concert in Calgary offered an unlikely balm. At Canada Olympic Park, fans bopped their heads to tales of bikini girls, surfboards, and T-birds. The Beach Boys don't just sing about America. They are America. Canadian boomers turned out in droves to hear them. Fans stood, swayed, and sang along. It's the same demographic that supposedly backs anti-American politicians. Yet no one booed when a stylized Star-Spangled Banner lit up the screen. Outside, calls to buy Canadian and boycott American are endless. The same crowd that preaches tolerance lacks grace for the country that gave them jazz, baseball, blue jeans, the Mustang, and the moon landing. Much more unites Canadians and Americans than divides us. Too bad, division peddlers. Fear-mongering can't extinguish what makes life beautiful. Sun, song, love, and friendship that transcend borders.
Well, there you have it. Marco, you're challenging us to think of the big unity picture, even with our neighbors. or why did you write that column, Marco?
I didn't intend to. I took my two youngest children to see the Beach Boys because they like the Beach Boys. I always liked the Beach Boys. And it struck me once I was there that we were all steeped, thousands of Calgarians, in this essentially American culture, an epitome of American culture, and that no one thought twice about Orange Man, even though apparently one of the leading guy of the Beach Boys today is a buddy of Trump's. It didn't come up at all. People were there to celebrate the things that they were there to celebrate, namely, this sort of great musical genre of the 60s and onwards. So it made me think, yeah, we need to focus on the things that bring us together and not on the silly things that divide us.
Well said. Robert, any closing thoughts of wisdom here as we reminisce on a Beach Boys concert?
The Beach Boys were always tunes that were played in the car when we were traveling around. You put a cassette tape in and, you'd replay it and you flip it over and play the next side and you do that over and over again. And it's always good. I did enjoy the handshake at the end. It was Australia and Canada shaking hands at the end there.
That's
right. But
no.
Well,
this has been a delightful conversation. I want to thank both of you, Robert Falcon-Ouellette, as well as Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini. It's been delightful to have you on. We've covered a lot of ground with our incredible audience. I have seen dozens and dozens of comments and questions, so I want to thank you, as usual, for this insightful conversation. And on behalf of the Madam Producer, Lorraine, and myself, we want to thank all of you for participating in today's conversation. As we are at halftime during this federal election, as we turn towards the home stretch, let's all take the time to bone up on our knowledge and insight on all the parties and what they're saying and how this is serving Canadians. So on that note, I want to thank all of you and welcome you to next week's discussion. We'll continue the same time and same place.
Thanks very much.
Hey, tapoy akikitwam. Hi.
Thank you for watching Leaders